Hey guys, this is the Chapter 6 video lecture. The title of this chapter is Early Motor Development. Alright, in this chapter we're going to start to reflect on the processes that are necessary for humans to develop normal motor development, or motor behavior, motor skills, basic human movement. So whenever we talk about basic human movement, we're obviously referring to the ability to walk and to stand and to run. I mean, everything, the basic skills that everyone can do. Okay, which will then eventually lead to particular skills that those who engage in the particular movements on a frequent basis, like the athletes in training, how they can start performing different types of movements that not just everybody can do. Okay, so today we are going to start talking about early human movement. And again, this is, as we go through this discussion, I want you to start reflecting on basic human movement. Okay, so everything we talk about today, it's almost like a step-by-step process in order for us to eventually be able to do what we do as humans. Okay, all right. So, with everything here, there's so when we talk about, it says here some of the milestones, the motor milestones. This is normal development. And when we talk about normal development, if you guys can remember the terms, the universality and specificity. Universality refers to movement or skills that everyone, or characteristics that everyone experiences or demonstrates or reveals. So these step-by-step milestones, if you will, is universal. It happens with everyone. Everyone who undergoes normal human development experiences or achieves these particular milestones. Okay. Now the specificity is that from individual to individual, the timing may be different. How they're accomplished may be different. But nonetheless, it's a predictable step-by-step pattern. Okay. So in order to achieve the next motor milestone, the previous one has to be achieved first and mastered. Okay, so as we go through this discussion, just keep that in mind. So let's start with some early forms of movement. There are two general types of early human movement: the spontaneous movements and the reflective movements. All right, the spontaneous movements. They're called spontaneous because it looks like they're random, spontaneous, movements. But there's purpose behind these particular movements. So it says here movements that occur without any apparent stimulation. And why I say it looks like random. If you've ever seen an infant, a newborn, they move. But it doesn't look like they're moving with purpose or with intent. They may look like their arm is twitching or they're shaking or they're doing something like this. And again, if you look at an infant, a newborn, not like a toddler, or not an infant that's been alive for a few months. I'm talking about like within a couple of days to a couple of weeks old. They'll lay on their back and they'll look like they're shaking or doing some type of movement. This is the kickstart of the nervous system. This is the nervous system, like trying to, like, hey, there's a lot of things that are responsible for us to start walking. And one of those things is the nervous system has to fire impulses to the muscles, and then the muscles have to respond to those impulses saying, okay, now that I'm getting impulses from the nervous system, I need to contract. And now that the muscles are contracting, it's starting to pull on the bones, and movement starts to occur. Okay, so this is the kickstart. This is like if you get in your car in the morning, whenever you turn the key, it's that revving the engine, getting the engine, to turn over. That's the nervous system trying to do this with the human body. Okay, so these spontaneous movements You can see examples at the bottom: supine kicking and spontaneous arm movements. Okay, so here's a picture of supine kicking. Now, in this picture, if you look at it step by step, it looks like a developed movement in terms of leg extension to hip flexion to knee flexion to again leg extension and knee extension. But it's really not that clear. Like I said, these are more like twitches, if you will. An infant laying on its back will perform supine kicking, and at first it's just the little legs again, it's just like kickstart. It looks random. It looks like they're twitching. They're not really engaged in slow, fluid, full range of motion type of motion that you and I would do if we were on our back, doing some leg kicks. But this again is if you can recall Newell's model of constraints, one of the first things that has to happen is the development of the individual constraint, the structural constraint. I'm sorry, there's I'm gonna have to go back to it. There's in the individual constraints. There's the structural and the I can't remember the other one, but the structural is the one referring to all of the body systems having to be developed enough in order for a movement to be achieved. And if you're thinking about it, we're during the first year of life, we're really getting to the point where we're trying to walk, and everything we do, starting with supine kicking, has to be achieved in order for us to start walking. Okay. Now, in order for us to start walking, our muscles have to be developed enough to withstand our body weight, to hold our body weight, or to hold our body in an upright position. The bones have to be sturdy enough, or they have to be dense enough in order for us for them to withstand the body weight. The nervous system has to be coordinated enough to control the muscular contractions of all the muscles responsible for walking. Okay, and then the cardiovascular system, the blood supply has to be delivering the adequate amount of blood and oxygen to the muscles. So a lot of things have to be achieved in order for a human to start walking. But this is the beginning of the process. So the supine kicking, at first it's the twitched, it's very irregular, very random. Apparently it's random, but eventually the supine kicking becomes more and more fluid. Okay, and now the baby's starting to control that movement. Okay, and that's part of development. Okay, now another thing to keep in mind about these movements, these milestones, if you will, this is a way to determine whether the baby is being developed or the infant is developing normally or not. So this is predictable. This happens with every single infant. So within the first couple of days, couple of weeks, supine kicking begins, and that's normal. Exactly when it occurs, it differs from individual, but the pattern is still the same. This has to be accomplished first. So the randomness, that's the beginning, and then whenever the fluidness or the coordination becomes more and more apparent, then the baby is progressing and can progress to the next particular movement. Okay, another example of supine kicking eventually, once it becomes fluid, it starts to mimic walking, even though the baby can't stand on itself, can't stand by itself, and it can't hold or withstand his own body weight. But the movement itself is resembling walking. It's teaching itself, if you will, how to walk, even though it's on its back. Okay. Here's some more pictures of supine kicking. You can see the babies do that, and there's new toys. You can see here this toy that the baby just kind of after he starts to control legs, he can start playing with whatever's in front of him, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a picture like this. It could be like if you put your hands in front of the baby, the baby might push up against a hand, but at first the infant, the week-old, the 2-week-old infant, the leg kicks are very spontaneous, very random. Doesn't seem like it has any purpose. So here's a video of supine kicking, and this is a baby at 2 months old.
Kicking? Good boy. Oh, good boy. I see you pushing. Yeah. I see you. I see you. Good boy. Good.
Yeah, you can see that baby. That's at 2 months old. That baby's been supine kicking for a couple of months, and he's developed enough leg strength to be able to really put some forceful kicks out there. I mean, some of those kicks, I mean, obviously not going to hurt you and I, but they're rather forceful for a baby, and that's the baby's. That's like almost like the baby's way to train. Like you do leg press to strengthen your leg muscles. Well, this is the baby exercising. This is the baby training to become a walker, an effective walker. Okay. All right. The other spontaneous movement is the spontaneous arm movements. Just like the leg kicking, the arm movements, it starts off as twitches at first, very random, very spontaneous, but eventually it becomes more fluid, more coordinated. Okay, and this is the baby's effort to gain strength and coordination in its upper limbs. I mean, because that's that strength is going to be needed to pull himself up, or to grab things, to hold on to things, just to do anything with their arms. They have to develop the strength in order to be able to do that. Let's see. So here are some arm and leg movements. This video's not available, but yeah, you could see some videos on YouTube. So going back to the beginning of this discussion, there are two types of early human movements. You have the spontaneous movements, which we covered, the supine kicking, and the spontaneous arm movements. And then you have the reflective movement. Now, the reflective movements, these are responses to stimuli, and really, this is about survival. The baby doesn't think, I need to survive. This is instinct. Okay, so the reflection, these reflective movements are related to some type of, or the underlying rationale with these reflective movements is survival. Okay, some way, somehow. Okay, and I'll give you some examples in a second. So there are built-in responses that facilitate survival. So like I said, they're instinctual. Every baby does this, and it's normal. If a baby doesn't do it, that means there's some type of abnormal development going on. So if you guys ever get into occupational therapy school and you start working with children and infants, looking at these, assessing for these milestones will allow you to determine whether or not the baby is developing normally or not. Okay. And again, these reflexive movements are building blocks for future movement. So again, an opportunity for them to gain the strength and the coordination in order to perform more complex skills later on in life. All right, so there's three types of reflective movements. There's the primitive reflexes, the postural reflexes, and the locomotor reflexes. Okay, the primitive reflexes. All of these are involuntary. They're in response to a stimulus. The response is automatic and without thought. Okay. Let's see. So primitive reflexes. Just to give you some examples, These are also called the infantile reflexes. But for example, like grasping, for example, palmar grasping. If you were to touch an infant in its palm, it will try to grab your hand. Okay, it closes tightly around an object or whatever whatever the object's in its hand. It grabs it without thought. It doesn't feel something in its hand and wonder what is that. Let me see what that is, and then sees it and says, "Oh, I want to grab it. I'm going to grab it." No, it hasn't developed that cognitive skill yet. Like you and I, if we feel something in our hand, we can look down and we can see that there's something in our hand. Now, again, if it's something that we want or something that's useful to us, then yeah, we can then decide that we want to grab it. We can also decide, I don't need it right now, and not grab it, right? Likewise, you may feel something in your hand, and you may see that it's something that you don't want, like a poisonous bug or something, and you immediately brush it off. Okay, a baby hasn't developed that ability yet. Whenever it feels something in its hand, it grabs it. Okay, now this is a survival tactic because it's well, I don't want to say thought process because it's not really thinking. The instinct is if it's falling or if it's in a dangerous situation, it wants to grab everything in order to keep from falling and pretty much dying. Now the baby can't process that at a couple of weeks old, but that's the whole thought. I mean that's the purpose of the grabbing. Another thing is sucking. If you touch the baby near its mouth, it will immediately turn towards that and try to suck on it because, again, it's thinking survival mode. It needs to eat, and it's trying to eat at really any time. Okay. Now, again, the baby doesn't really think, "Oh, look, that's something to eat. I need to eat that." But that's just survival mode. That's the body's way to survive before cognitive development has occurred. Okay. Let's see. So the doll eye. Another one is if you flex the head or if you tilt the head, the eyes will stay fixed on on a particular position. I think I may have an example. Yeah. So here's right in the middle of the page, the doll eye. All right, so what the purpose of that is, again, if it's in falling mode, if it falls off a cliff or whatever, it tries to fix itself, so to kind of keep its orientation, even though it's falling and twisting and turning. It's trying. The baby would be trying to fix its vision on something to try to keep its orientation. Okay. You see here at the bottom, the sucking is whenever something is placed into their mouth, they suck because they think that's the way to eat. But searching is whenever they feel something close to their mouth, they know to feel for it. That's called searching. They know because in order to survive, the baby doesn't know, but it knows that it needs to eat in order to survive. Okay. The bottom one, the moro or the startle. Whenever the baby, if you were to sit the baby upright and then drop it down, so that it falls on its back, again, it thinks it's falling, and this is its way to try to catch itself. It spreads its legs and spreads its arms to try to catch itself, grab onto anything. I mean, if you were to fall off a cliff, I mean, that would be the first thing that you would do is your arms would go out into parachute mode and trying to grasp anything in order to stop your fall. Okay. If you don't believe me, try it. It still happens. I don't think you lose that. Okay, so going back to this chart, this is table 6.1 in your book. It'll give you all the reflections. It gives you the starting position, so it'll tell you, if the baby starts in this position or if you place the baby in this position. So, for example, the first one in the supine position, that means you put the baby on its back and you turn its head to the side, to either one or the other side. It'll actually turn its whole body towards that side, and this is in an effort to ensure that it doesn't that the neck, the spinal cord isn't severed. So this is a survival tactic. Again, it doesn't have the ability to think of survival, So it has to, this is instinct. This is just the body. It's the way the body works, and this happens with every infant, even you. Okay, so that's the so there's the reaction or the reflex, the starting position, and then how you would stimulate it in order to get the response that you should get. And if you get the response, that means there's normal development. If you don't get the response, that means that there's some type of abnormal development going on. But something's not happening, something's not developing. So, if you're in occupational therapy, then this is something that you would help the baby, try to develop that normal development. The time from prenatal to 4 months. So the reflex should occur then. This is the asymmetric tonic neck reflex, also known as the ATNR. So after about 4 months, the baby realizes, my spinal cord's not going to sever. So if my head gets tilted to the right, I'm okay. I don't need to roll over to protect my spinal cord. But up to about 4 months, the spinal cord is rather fragile. So, if the baby's, head starts to turn, it'll turn its whole body just to ensure that its spinal cord doesn't sever. Let's see, like the palmar grasping, as I mentioned earlier, like we have the ability to think about whether or not we want to grasp an object in our hand, depending on what that object is. A baby doesn't do that. Okay, so but after about 4 months, according to this chart or this table, it'll look and see, should I grab it or not? But up until that, it doesn't have that ability. So that's what this chart is telling you. Okay, so again, the reaction, the starting position, the stimulus, or what do you need to do in order to trigger the response, and then when that response should occur. So in this case, the palmar grasping, from prenatal, so before birth, all the way up to about 4 months. Okay, now what are the warning signs if this is persistent after 1 year? Okay. So asymmetrical reflex it pretty much means that they grasp with one hand, but they don't grasp with the other. Okay, so if you're performing an assessment on an infant, and again, this will probably be after either after you graduate or after you finish the OT school or whatever. But that's the kind of assessment you do on infants. If you see persistence of grasping after 1 year, or there's asymmetric reflex at any point during the first year, especially during the first 4 months, that's a sign of abnormality, abnormal development. Okay, so you can look at these reflexes and read up on them, but the whole point is that these are, they're instinctual. So, they're designed to protect the infant before the infant can protect itself, pretty much, before it can start thinking for itself. They're also, indicators of abnormal development. And then there are also opportunities for motor development, so to develop motor skills or future motor skills. Okay. So here are the postural reactions. The postural reactions, let me go back to here. They help the infant automatically maintain posture in a changing environment. Now, the changing environment is usually either they're rolling around or they're falling, and this helps them to try to maintain their orientation. And this is actually something that we do now. So going back to these postural reactions, you can see here the first one, derogative writing. You can see the time from 4 months on. All right, so from after 4 months until we die, we do this every time we experience the stimulus. What's the stimulus? You turn the legs and pelvis to the other side. Okay. So if we're laying in a supine position, and something turns our legs and pelvis to one side, to the other side, to the prone position, then the trunk and head will follow the rotation. And that's true. I mean, you can't. I mean, you can stop that, but if someone forcefully turns you over, then your whole body will turn over. So that's what this is saying. Okay, the labyrinth writing. So if you sit an infant upright and you support it, and then you tilt the infant either to the left or to the right, the head will move so that it stays upright. So if you tilt to the right, the head will still kind of tilt in order to try to maintain orientation. Now, does that happen with us? If somebody tilts us to the right or left? No, not necessarily, because we have the ability to maintain upright. But if we were to fall, one of the first things we would do if we fell off a cliff or whatever, and again, I don't advocate, I'm not telling you to try it, but if we did, one of the first things we would do is we would tilt our body trying to maintain our upright position. I don't know if you've ever fallen before, but that's the only way that you can experience it. And again, I don't advocate it, so don't try it if you don't feel comfortable. A parachute is another example that I think you may feel like you've experienced it. Anytime you've fallen, if you think about it, if somebody pushes you, you trip. I mean, one of the first things you do is you put your arms out in front of you to catch your fall. That's the parachute. Same thing if somebody pushes you backwards. One of the first things you do is you throw your arms back to try to catch yourself before you fall and hit your head. Okay. That's a reflex that we experience from the time we're 4 months old all the way to the time we die. Okay, so I mean that's an example I think that you would be you would be familiar with. Like I think everyone has experienced that. If not, just tell somebody to push you forward and see if you don't catch yourself with your hands. The locomotor reflexes. There's crawling, stepping, and swimming. So the locomotor reflexes are involuntary modifications or locomotor movements produced by sensory signals from receptors in the limbs. Okay, so let's talk about these, and I'll give you, be able to explain it more. The stepping, for example, whenever you hold an infant upright. Now, obviously, the baby won't be able to stand and support itself, but if you held it and you put its feet on a flat surface, then it starts to want to walk. It puts its feet out like it's trying to walk. I mean, obviously, it's not putting out enough pressure or enough force to be able to hold itself, but it's at least like spacewalking, it's just kind of going through the walking motion, but it's not really supporting itself. So if you've ever been around babies, you put the baby in one of those chairs where you can put the baby in the chair and it kind of bounces up and down. Well, if they're sitting there, you'll watch them. They'll feel the ground and they'll want to walk, but they're just kind of just like brushing the ground like it's a feather, like their foot's a feather. They don't really put a lot of pressure on it, so they're not really supporting itself or putting enough force to support itself. But it's a reflex. It's a normal reflex that they do that. And really the piece of this is that it helps in developing the leg movements, the leg muscles, and all of the systems in order to eventually start walking itself. The swimming reflex, if you place an infant in the water, it'll automatically start swimming. Now it's not gonna Michael Phelps swimming, but it's it knows at least to swim for survival. I don't know how effective it really is, but it knows that it's a swim. It starts to swim its arms and kick its legs, and this happens for the first couple of months of life until eventually, hopefully by that time the baby has learned how to swim. So I shouldn't say that, because there's adults that don't know how to swim, but it's the reflex. So eventually they lose the reflex. Eventually they can be placed in water and realize, I'm going to be held up, so there's no need for me to kick my arms or legs. But before that, before they develop the cognition to realize that they're being supported, you put a baby in water, it starts to just kick his legs because it thinks it needs to survive. Okay. All right. So here are the primitive reflexes again. Here are the postural reflexes, and then the locomotor reflexes. All right. So we went through not all of the reflexes, but go through the table. And the question is, what voluntary behaviors might they be linked to? So I just mentioned, like, the stepping, for example. I mean, there's no doubt it's walking. That's a baby's attempt at that age to try to, not necessarily to try to walk, but the movement itself is helping the infant prepare for walking eventually. Okay. All right, so again, all of these movements, they occur in a predictable pattern, and this happens in everyone. This is the universal characteristic, is that these motor milestones, or these particular movements, occur in a predictable pattern. And the reason why it's predictable is because in order for the next movement to be achieved, the previous movement has to be achieved first and mastered. Okay, so just because the baby, whenever you hold it up and it feels a flat surface and it achieves the stepping milestone, so it's achieved that. Now it's started to do that. Now it's got to start doing that, pretty frequently in order to master the actual walking motion. Okay, so walking motion is a predictable pattern, and we've developed that pattern. We call that the gait. But in babies, it's more of a random movement. They're just kind of brushing the floor, but they don't really have any purpose or intent. It's not for a couple of months until the baby actually has an intent. It's like, what, I want to start walking, and I've developed a constant and consistent pattern in my gait. Okay, so again, the milestones are achieved and mastered before the next one can be achieved. Okay, so again, the combination of spontaneous and reflexive movements, they lead to coordinated and purposeful activities. Usually, eventually they're helping us develop, what we experience, as mature humans. I mean, the ability to walk and run and jump and stand. So it's like I said, these are the building blocks of more complex motor skills. All right, so you can see here are the milestones, and again, if you were working with infants and babies, I mean, these are the ways that you would assess them. You would send them. You would look at, you would determine how old are they, and then you would say, okay, well, if they're this age, they should be able to do this. They should be able to do that. And this is the milestone. And if any of these milestones aren't achieved, then either development is slow or it's abnormal. And this is what so this entire chart is leading up to the ability to walk. Okay, so in order for a baby to walk, it has to be able to lift its head when it's on its, or whenever you hold a baby, it has to be able to lift its head. Okay, that's one of the earliest movements. Is lots of times and that's fine. Like lots of times within the first couple of weeks, the baby can't hold itself up, and that's normal. It's just not strong enough yet. But whenever it does develop enough neck muscles in order to hold its neck up, then it can lead to other other movements. Okay, you can see here lateral head movements, arm thrust in play, leg thrust in play. Those are your spontaneous movements. It retains the red ring, so it can grasp and hold on to it and actually play with it. That happens within the first couple of months. It can hold its head erect and steady. and then it can start turning to the side from its side to its back. Now, you may not think that this is an important milestone, but really it's showing that the baby is developing the trunk muscles, the abdominal muscles, the oblique muscles, and the erector spinae muscles in order to control its own movement, in order to dictate its own movement. Let's see. Eventually, it can sit with support, and sitting with support, it requires all the adequate musculature of the trunk in order to support itself. It can turn from its back to its side. Again, the muscles are developing. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, just sneezed. Let's see. About from 4 to 8 months, it can sit alone momentarily. Eventually, it can sit up, by itself. But at least it can sit without any support. At 4 to 8 months, there's also unilateral reaching. So all those spontaneous arm movements have actually developed into controlled movement. Now it can control itself. Whenever it can reach with purpose rather than just spontaneous random movement. It's it can see a toy or something, some type of stimulus, and it could actually reach for it. Now, does it have fine motor control? Not just yet, but at least it has the ability to reach for it. Okay. Let's see. Rolls from back to front, sits alone steadily, complete thumb opposition. Pre-walking progression from about 5 months to 11 months. It can pull itself to standing, so the baby at some point between 5 to 12 months can actually pull itself up and stand, and usually it stands by like some furniture or couch or a coffee table, and then eventually it starts to start walking very gingerly at first. The body's just not quite used to holding up all the weight, its body weight. It's not used to having the required muscles contracting all at once in order to allow this movement to occur. But that's how the baby practices. It holds on to baby. We call this cruising, to the point where after enough cruising, the baby just develops enough muscular strength and bone structure to hold itself up, and it starts to walk by itself. All right, so there's the progression from early movement all the way up to walking. Okay, so at that point, it has achieved one of the basic human movements. Now, it still has to develop the ability to run and to jump, but that happens usually about the first year. Okay. So as they get stronger, they're able to stand by themselves. They're able to walk on their own. Eventually, they can start walking backwards, which is a monumental task for a baby who doesn't know what's behind them. They can start walking up the stairs. Eventually, jump off the floor, and then finally, they can just start, performing all the skills, and that's usually about, within the first 2 years of life, they finally achieve, the basic human movements. Then they can start achieving more particular movements. They can start engaging in sports or, exercise or gymnastics. I mean, things that, not everybody can achieve, unless, of course, they train themselves. Okay. So this is the order at which the milestones are achieved is relatively consistent, although the timing does differ from individual to individual. And all of these are related to the individual constraints, and it does require the maturation of several body systems, including the nervous system, the muscular system, the skeletal system, the cardiovascular system, which is associated with endurance. And all of the musculature and the sensory processing that's required in order to develop independent movement. So these are these the videos. Okay. Then here at the bottom, this is atypical development. These are good videos to watch. I'm not going to show them right now during class, or I mean during my lecture. You can watch these on your own. I think the other ones are clips, so I'm going to go through those. But these at the bottom where it says baby milestone videos and atypical development video, yeah, these are good ones to see, because they'll do like a comparison, between one child that's developing normally and another child that's not developing normally, and it's good to watch that. So I would recommend that. Okay, let me go back to these clips. Okay, so I believe these are these clips. I'm going to go through these. Okay, so this is a clip of a baby performing a head lift in the prone position, and it says it lifts its shoulders and turns its head. Let's see what it does.
Here we see some nice head lifting and extension through the thoracic spine. Marty's hips and knees are moving out of the flexed position into an extended, adducted position, shifting his weight posteriorly toward the pelvis area. This frees his upper body so he can lift his head and upper trunk off the support surface. We can also see little weight shifts from right to left, which he's able to counteract with his abdominals to balance himself, all the while increasing his shoulder girdle strength and changing the sensory input on his arms. As his legs progress out of the flexed newborn position, he is able to lift his trunk and begin using his vision to fix on something in the distance. At this age, you should not expect the elbows to be in line with the shoulders, and he will not yet be reaching for toys. We see that Owen has a much more newborn-looking posture, which shifts the weight forward towards the head and shoulder area, making it more difficult for him to lift his head up. He has much more hip and knee flexion than Marty. Once the hips are extended, he will be able to start to lift his head up a little more. It's important to note how changes in the leg position allow the infant to begin developing head and trunk control in the prone position. If Owen does not independently progress to the more extended and abducted legs, he'll be stuck in this position, unable to lift up his head and push up on his arms. His strategy to get any movement is to extend and push up on his legs, which is a non-productive strategy because it doesn't assist him in lifting his head and pushing up on his arms against gravity. When the examiner uses a rattle, Owen gets quiet and listens. But because lifting and turning his head is so difficult when his hips are flexed under him, he is unable to find the auditory stimuli, even though he hears it.
So you can see that from that video is an example of how a practitioner will examine infants to determine whether or not they're reaching their motor milestones, and if they're not, then that's again an indicator that there's abnormal development. All right, let's see if this is another. Okay, this is taking me somewhere else. Let's stay with. Let's look at another video. Okay, yeah, these videos are going to take me somewhere else. I think that's why I provided you with those other two videos. These two videos down at the bottom. You guys watch those. Those are pretty good. Again, it's just like that first video where they have two babies in the same video. One's developing normally, the other one's developing abnormally. But you can at least see and you can hear the terminology being used, and hopefully you can apply what we've discussed over the last couple of minutes to those videos and understand. Okay, that's normal development or atypical development. Okay, so this is now talking about rate limiters or controllers. Rate limiters are simply individual constraints that inhibit or slow the attainment of a motor skill. And as you might imagine, I mean, the majority, or most of the reason why an infant is restricted to particular movements is simply because they're just not strong enough. I mean, from the video we just saw, lifting the head is so important. But to you and I mean, we lift our head. We take it for granted. But for an infant, lifting the head is a monumental task. I mean, because at first they can't lift their head, and if they can't lift their head, then they can't really perform other skills. So you can see that like the rate limiter in that case is are they able to lift their head, and if they're not, then that's the reason why they can't progress to the next milestone. Okay, so once they are accomplishing, then it becomes a controller, because then it allows them to perform another skill. Okay. But yeah, this is again talking about normal development, atypical development, or abnormal development. There's also theories about the difference between the first sibling and then there's like the last of several, and it has to deal with parenting. The first time you become a parent, I mean, you're going to be, and it's not just you or I. I mean, this is almost common that first time mothers, they're heavily, they hover over their children. They're constantly trying to push them, and sometimes they push too far, and it doesn't allow the baby or the infant to develop like they should have. Whereas whenever a mother has a third or fourth or fifth child, they're like, I've already done this. I mean, I've done this before. I'm not. I mean, not that they're not excited about their child, but they're just not as excited as they are as the first time they had a child. So they tend not to pay as much attention to those children. But this is a good thing, because it allows those children to develop more naturally, more normally, on their own terms. Whenever they feel like they want to proceed to the next milestone. Rather than being accelerated. And these are the children that usually they develop more fully, but it's just again the difference in being a first time mother and this is my fifth child. I'm not as excited as I was. And again, I don't mean the excitement of like having a child per se, but just the first time it's a new experience. By the fifth time, it's like, I've already done this before. I don't need to be right on top of them all the time. Okay, so that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. So that's the chapter on early human movement. Hopefully, you get from this chapter the differences between spontaneous movements and reflexive movements, and understanding the purpose of those. The spontaneous movements are movements that are really allowing the infant to develop the strength and the musculature and the skeletal development, and really all of the bodily development that's needed for particular movements or eventual movements. The reflexive movements are more designed to protect the infant before it can really think for itself. If there's any, if these don't occur in a predictable pattern, then that's an indicator that there's abnormal development present. So take a look at these. This is just the beginning of movement. In Chapter 7, we'll start looking at more advanced movements. So we're going to get into our movements and how we develop the skills that we develop, and then I'll eventually have a discussion on your presentations that are due here in the next few weeks. Okay. All right. You guys have a good night. I'll talk to you soon. Let me know if you have any questions.